The chandeliers of Primrose Hall blazed with 1,000 trembling lights, their brilliance reflected in the polished marble beneath the dancers' feet. Music swelled through the air like a rising tide, glittering laughter rippling across the ballroom as London's elite moved in perfect, practiced grace. Yet when Miss Eliza Harcourt stepped across the threshold, the sound altered, barely perceptibly at first, then entirely. The violins faltered. A breath seemed drawn and never released, and then, as if on cue, came the whispering. "Eliza Harcourt," someone murmured behind a jeweled fan. "The one who disgraced the Viscount. She had the audacity to appear here," hissed another. Eliza felt the prickle of 100 eyes, each glance like frost against her skin. The soft silk of her gown, pale blue, almost silver under the gaslight, did nothing to shield her from their scrutiny. Her gloved hands tightened around her fan, its ivory sticks trembling slightly. She had thought herself ready for this. She had told herself that courage, once summoned, could not fade. But courage, she discovered, was not armor, it was glass, and she could hear the first hairline cracks forming. She crossed the floor with the composure her governess once called her greatest virtue. Chin high, shoulders drawn back. The orchestra found its rhythm again, hesitant at first, then obedient to Lady Tressel's discreet nod. But conversation flowed, only to curdle in her wake. She could see her reflection in the tall mirrors, her face calm, her eyes betraying nothing. Yet she knew what they saw. Not Eliza Harcourt, the daughter of an honorable colonel, but the woman who had been caught alone in the conservatory. The accusation was untrue, of course. She had gone there for air. Her former fiancé, Viscount Aylesford, had followed. His hand had caught her wrist. His words had been soft, pleading, and then cruel. A door had opened. A maid had gasped, and the rest, fabricated by tongues too idle for mercy, became her ruin. Now, every glance carried the same silent question: "What kind of woman are you?" Across the ballroom, Lady Tressel watched with satisfaction. The hostess's smile was sharp as crystal, her gown an empire of crimson silk. Eliza knew she had been invited not from kindness, but curiosity. London's appetite for scandal was endless, and what better entertainment than the fallen darling herself? She moved toward the edge of the floor, seeking a measure of anonymity near the tall windows. The air there was cooler, carrying the faint scent of rain from the gardens beyond. A carriage wheel rattled on the gravel outside. The night was silvered and still. Then, like the shifting of a storm's current, the atmosphere in the room changed. Conversation thinned, laughter stilled. A new arrival had stepped into the hall. "The Duke of Warrington," someone whispered. "He's come." The name alone drew silence. Eliza turned her head slightly, enough to see him without seeming to look. He stood in the doorway, a tall figure in black, broad-shouldered, motionless. His hair, dark as jet, framed a face too austere to be called handsome, though no woman could have looked away once she had seen him. His eyes, gray, almost silver, moved slowly across the assembly, unhurried, unkind. Men inclined their heads with something closer to fear than respect. Women lowered their lashes. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Warrington, the Iron Duke, as the papers called him. He had returned from the continent 5 years ago with a title, a fortune, and the sort of silence that bred legends. They said he had seen horrors in the Crimea, that his sister's death had made him merciless, that no heart beat beneath that immovable exterior. Now that heart, or its echo, turned toward Eliza. Their eyes met across the ballroom. She could not have said what passed between them in that moment, curiosity, defiance, pity, but something indefinable held his gaze. He moved forward through the crowd, his steps measured, deliberate. The sea of satin and lace parted before him. He stopped before her. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice deep and steady, like the low roll of thunder before a storm. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Gasps spread through the room. Eliza froze. Around her, whispers ignited like kindling. The Duke with her? He cannot be serious. Eliza's throat tightened. She saw the smirk on Lady Tressel's lips, the scandalized delight in every face. To refuse him would be its own humiliation, to accept would feed the fire further. And yet, something in his eyes restrained her from declining. There was no mockery there, no visible kindness either. Only a grave, unreadable intent. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I would be honored, Your Grace." He offered his arm. She placed her hand upon it, her touch light, as if she feared to disturb him. The orchestra began again, tentatively. A waltz. They moved together into the center of the room. The murmurs died. The Duke's hand rested at her waist, his other guiding hers with impeccable precision. His movements were exact, his posture unyielding. Yet there was something beneath the formality, a tension like a held breath. "You should not have asked me," she said quietly without looking up. "Should?" His voice was almost curious. "Society has rules, Miss Harcourt. I have none that matter. You court their disdain." He turned his head slightly, his gaze following the spinning crowd. "I have long been acquainted with disdain. It has little novelty left." Her heart pounded. "They will think you pity me." "Then let them." His hand guided her into a turn. "Pity is a luxury they cannot afford, and I have no need to borrow theirs." For a moment, the world contracted to the rhythm of the dance, the soft brush of silk, the faint scent of sandalwood, the gleam of his cuff against her glove. The music slowed, deepened, then faded. When it ended, he released her hand but did not immediately step back. His gaze lingered on her face as though memorizing a truth others had refused to see. Then, lowering his voice so that only she could hear, he said, "Miss Harcourt, do not mistake silence for judgment. It is often the only mercy left to those who have seen too much." She stared at him, uncomprehending. But before she could speak, he bowed with immaculate formality and turned away. He walked the length of the ballroom, indifferent to the shock he left in his wake, and vanished into the corridor beyond. Eliza stood, motionless, as the whispers resumed, louder now, electric with curiosity. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could still feel the ghost of his hand against her back, the quiet authority in his words. Lady Trestle approached, her smile brittle as frost. "My dear," she said sweetly, "you have quite stolen the attention of the room." Eliza inclined her head. "It was never my intention." "Oh, but of course not. And yet, how very dramatic. The Iron Duke himself." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "They say he lost his heart once long ago and buried it with his sister. Be careful, Miss Harcourt. He is not known for tenderness." Eliza's lips curved faintly. "Neither, it seems, is the world." When Lady Trestle drifted away, Eliza turned toward the window once more. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tracing thin lines down the glass. In their reflection, she saw herself, no longer merely the subject of gossip, but a figure drawn into a far deeper intrigue than she understood. And somewhere beyond the rain-soaked gardens, she imagined the Duke's carriage departing into the night, its lamps burning through the mist, like a promise or a warning, yet to be named. The morning after the ball arrived gray and wind-stirred, London wrapped in a damp hush. Eliza Harcourt sat by her mother's parlor window, the world beyond veiled by rain. The events of the previous night played again in her mind, the hush of the ballroom, the Duke's unrelenting gaze, his voice like tempered steel. She had not slept. The memory of his words. "Silence is often the only mercy left to those who have seen too much," reverberated within her like a chord struck too deeply to fade. Her mother, Mrs. Harcourt, sat opposite, her embroidery untouched in her lap. "You mustn't think too much on it, my dear," she said with strained composure. "Men like the Duke are unpredictable. Perhaps he pitied you." "Pity?" Eliza murmured, her gaze drifting to the rain-beaded pane. "No, Mamma. He does not pity. He observes." "Then let him observe someone else." Her mother's voice trembled with weary frustration. "You must remember your position, Eliza. Our name hangs by a thread. As it is—" Eliza did not reply. She watched a carriage pass below, its wheels sending thin arcs of mud across the cobblestones. Even the city seemed to conspire in its indifference. For weeks, she had endured whispers, cold shoulders, and the slow collapse of friendships once believed genuine. But after that dance, the ton had found a new obsession. She could feel it gathering beyond their modest walls, an invisible storm preparing to break. By afternoon it arrived. The butler entered, stiff-backed, holding a velvet-lined box and a sealed letter. "A courier, Miss Harcourt," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "From His Grace, the Duke of Warrington." Mrs. Harcourt gasped. "From the Duke? Eliza, what have you done?" Eliza rose, her pulse quickening. The seal bore the blackthorn crest, dark wax glimmering like blood in the lamplight. She hesitated, then broke it. The note was brief, written in a firm, slanted hand. "If dignity cannot defend you, allow my name to do so." Inside the box lay a ring, heavy, gold, and unmistakably a man's. The blackthorn crest was carved deep into the metal, a stag in mid-leap, a blade beneath its hooves. Her breath caught. "It is a proposal," her mother whispered. "Oh, merciful heavens!" By evening, London was ablaze with the news. Servants carried it through kitchens, footmen through stables, and ladies through parlors scented with scandal. The Duke of Warrington had offered marriage to the disgraced Miss Harcourt. No announcement could have been more shocking if thunder itself had spoken. They said he was a man without sentiment, incapable of affection. Some speculated he wished to provoke society's hypocrisy. Others believed it a cruel jest. But none believed it could be love. The following day, Eliza was summoned to Warrington House. The Duke's note, delivered at dawn, contained only a time. No explanation. No plea. She dressed with trembling hands, choosing a gown of dove-gray silk, simple, without adornment. The carriage journey was silent save for the rain striking the glass. London passed by in muted blur, market stalls closing, chimney smoke dissolving into fog. When she arrived, the butler led her through echoing corridors lined with portraits, severe faces that watched her as though judging her worth. The Duke awaited her in his study, standing by a tall window. The light fell coldly on him, accentuating the clean planes of his face. He did not turn at once when she entered. "Your Grace," she said softly. "Miss Harcourt." His tone was neither warm nor dismissive, merely measured. "You received my letter." She clasped her hands. "I did. I confess I do not understand it." He turned then. His eyes met hers, gray, implacable. "You understand enough. London has made its sport of you. I offer a way to end it." "You would marry me for that?" she asked, voice unsteady. "For silence." He stepped closer, the faint scent of cedar and rain clinging to his coat. "I would marry you because truth requires a defender, and because I tire of watching decency destroyed by rumor." Her heart quickened. "Then you seek to prove a point, not to form a union." His expression did not change. "You think me incapable of both?" She drew in a breath. "I think you a man who chooses logic over affection." A shadow passed through his gaze. "Affection is fickle. Duty endures." The words struck her like cold water. She looked away, her composure cracking at last. "You mean to rescue me from disgrace at the cost of your own heart." "Perhaps," he said quietly, "I no longer possess one to lose." For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then he reached for the ring on the table between them, holding it out. The gold gleamed in the dimness. "Wear it," he said, "not as a token of affection, but as a shield." Her hand hovered. "You do not even ask if I consent." "If you wished to refuse," he murmured, "you would not have come." Their eyes met, hers wide with confusion, his steady with something she could not name. She hesitated, then took the ring. It was cool against her skin, heavier than she expected. "Then it is settled," he said. "You would truly go through with this?" she whispered. "I have faced worse fates than marriage, Miss Harcourt. And you?" She gave a faint, trembling smile. None worse than public pity. When she returned home, her mother awaited her in near hysterical disbelief. "Eliza, this is madness. The Duke's reputation, his temper, his silence. None of it bodes well. You cannot bind yourself to a man society fears." Society fears what it cannot control, Eliza replied softly. Perhaps so does he. The following week was a fever dream of preparation and gossip. Newspapers speculated endlessly. Caricatures appeared in shop windows depicting the Iron Duke and his fallen bride. Invitations ceased. Old friends crossed streets to avoid her. But Eliza found within herself a strange calm. For the first time, she felt something other than shame, defiance, perhaps, or the faint beginning of freedom. Still, uncertainty haunted her nights. She would sit awake, by candlelight, tracing the ring's crest, wondering what kind of man would chain himself to scandal for a woman he barely knew. What secret purpose guided his silence? On the eve of their wedding, she stood by her window again, the city beyond reduced to shadow and drizzle. In the next room, her mother prayed softly, as if warding off an unseen doom. The house felt too still, as though waiting. Then, from the corridor, came hushed voices, servants gossiping where they thought she could not hear. They say the Duke swore never to love again, one whispered. Not after his sister's death. This marriage, its duty, nothing more. Another voice, softer, then God help the girl. A man who cannot love is a man who cannot forgive. Eliza closed her eyes, her pulse loud in her ears. She did not weep, though the ache behind her ribs begged for release. She pressed her palm against the window pane, feeling the chill of the glass. Outside, the rain thickened into a relentless curtain, its rhythm matching her heart. In that moment, the full weight of what awaited her became clear, not merely marriage to a stranger, but to a mystery, a legend carved from grief. And though the world might call it salvation, Eliza Harcourt understood the truth. Tomorrow, she would exchange scandal for silence, freedom for a vow, and step into a life ruled by a man who no longer believed in love. Yet somewhere beneath the thunder's roll, she thought she heard his voice again. Low, steady, impossible to forget. If dignity cannot defend you, allow my name to do so. The words lingered, neither comfort nor threat, as the candle burned to its end. The bells of St. Albans tolled beneath a gray sky as Eliza Harcourt became the Duchess of Warrington. The ceremony passed in an echoing haze, hymns, vows, and the curious stares of guests who came not to bless but to witness. Her hand in the Duke's was steady, though her pulse stuttered with each syllable spoken. When he said, "I do," the words sounded more like an oath of endurance than affection. By the time the carriage bore them away from the church, the air smelled of rain again, as if the heavens refused to bless such a union with sunlight. Warrington Manor stood upon a rise of stone and shadow, its towers dark against the horizon. As the carriage approached, Eliza felt its vastness close around her, a fortress of silence, ancient and unyielding. The Duke offered no commentary, only opened the door and helped her down with a courtesy so precise it bordered on distance. Inside, the air was cool and still. A grand staircase spiraled upward like a column of ivory, portraits lining the walls, unsmiling ancestors with watchful eyes. At their base stood the housekeeper, a thin woman in black silk, who curtsied deeply. "Welcome home, Your Grace," she said, though her gaze flicked nervously toward her master before resting on Eliza. Home. The word seemed too tender for such a place. The days that followed blurred into formality. Breakfast taken in silence. Dinners under the steady light of candelabra. He addressed her with faultless civility, never unkind, yet never near. They inhabited the same house, as strangers might inhabit the same dream, aware but never meeting. One evening, she wandered the gallery while rain whispered against the windows. Her candlelight caught upon a portrait, a young woman fair-haired and bright-eyed, standing beside a garden fountain. Beneath the frame, in gilt letters, Lady Clara Blackthorne, 1827 to 1854. She had heard the story in hushed tones, the Duke's younger sister ruined by gossip, dead by her own hand. Society had devoured her name as it once did Eliza's. The likeness was delicate, but the sadness unmistakable. A sound behind her, his voice low and unreadable. "You found her." Eliza turned. He stood in the doorway, unannounced as ever, his expression softened only by memory. "Your sister," she said. He crossed the room slowly, his gaze fixed on the portrait. She loved the world too easily, he said. It did not return the favor. Eliza hesitated. I am sorry. He inclined his head, as if accepting an apology meant for fate. They called her reckless. They said she eloped with a man unworthy of her name. She believed him honorable. A pause. She was wrong. Eliza looked back at the painting. And you have hated society since. I have learned its appetite, he replied. It devours innocence first. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the patter of rain. Then more softly, do you regret marrying me? He looked at her, surprised, not by the question itself, but by the gentleness with which she asked it. Regret, he said after a moment, is for choices made in ignorance. I entered this one fully aware. That is not an answer. No, he admitted, it is not. Her hand brushed the frame, dust cool beneath her fingertips. You live as if emotion were a crime. It once was, he said. It made me weak when she needed strength. Eliza's throat tightened. You blame yourself for her death. His jaw set. Blame is useless. I carry her memory instead. She wanted to reach for him then, to offer something, a word, a gesture, but he had already turned away. The hour grows late, he said. Good night, Your Grace. After he left, she remained before the portrait until the candle burned low. The resemblance between the painted woman and herself unsettled her, both victims of rumor, both bound by silence. Days passed. She began to sense his habits, the way he walked the gardens at dawn, how he lingered near the library when storms gathered, as if drawn to solitude by instinct. Once, she found a volume of poetry on his desk, its pages marked and remarked. Tennyson. She had not imagined the Iron Duke capable of sentiment. That evening, she placed a small vase of lilies on the table by the window. When he entered later, his eyes flicked to them and then to her. You dislike lilies? She asked, uncertain. No, his voice softened slightly. Clara loved them. Something unspoken bridged the space between them, then grief recognizing grief. He did not thank her, but when he passed her chair, his hand brushed the back of it lightly, as if in acknowledgement. Weeks slipped by, each hour drawing them into a rhythm neither planned nor resisted. He began to speak more often, small things, inconsequential perhaps, yet charged with quiet meaning. She learned he could be thoughtful, even kind, though his kindness arrived disguised as restraint. Once, when a servant dropped a tray in her presence, she saw his eyes flash with a protectiveness that startled her. One afternoon, a sudden storm forced them indoors while returning from the stables. They took refuge in the library, dripping from the rain. The Duke removed his gloves, the motion precise, deliberate. His hair clung damply to his forehead, his expression unreadable. Eliza laughed softly, an unguarded sound that seemed to startle them both. We look quite the tragic pair, she said, brushing water from her sleeve. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, faint but unmistakable. You should change before you catch cold, he said. So, should you, Your Grace? Or does the Iron Duke not fear illness? I fear many things, he said quietly. Illness is not one of them. The tone silenced her mirth. She studied him, uncertain. Then what do you fear? His eyes met hers. For the first time, she saw something unarmored there. Myself. The word hung between them, raw and final. She stepped closer. You speak as though you are your own enemy. Perhaps I am. He looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Everything I have touched, my sister, my peace, now you suffers for it. I do not suffer. Not yet. Her breath caught. Why do you speak so? Because, he said, voice low, I know the pattern of ruin. It begins with trust. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, that she was not fragile, that she had survived enough cruelty to bear his shadows too, but his expression forbade it. Adrian, she said, suddenly testing his name. He stiffened. You cannot live forever behind blame. It is a prison with no doors. He turned toward her fully then, eyes fierce and strangely vulnerable. And what would you know of prisons, Eliza? Her chin lifted. Everything. A tremor passed between them, a recognition too deep for words. The rain hammered harder, wind rattling the glass. He exhaled long and unsteady. "Go," he said softly, "before I say something I cannot retract." She hesitated, then obeyed, but at the doorway she glanced back. He stood by the fire, one hand braced against the mantel, his head bowed as though the weight of memory pressed too heavily upon him. That night, as she lay awake, she thought of his confession, not of fear but of himself, and felt something within her shift. He was not unfeeling. He was terrified of feeling at all. Outside, thunder rolled across the moors, a distant echo of the storm within their walls. And though neither spoke of it again, Eliza knew a truth had been uncovered. Fragile, incomplete, but undeniable. Somewhere deep in Warrington Manor, behind locked doors and shuttered eyes, the Iron Duke had begun to thaw. The morning broke gray and sullen, as if the sky itself disapproved of what must come. Warrington Manor stood shrouded in mist, its gardens swallowed by fog, the scent of rain thick in the air. Eliza woke before dawn, the restlessness of the night still coiled in her chest. She had heard the servants whispering, something about a letter delivered at midnight, a visitor from London, and the Duke's command that his horse be readied before sunrise. By the time she reached the grand staircase, he was already in the hall, gloved and cloaked, his profile carved against the dim light. He looked every inch the man she had first met, stoic, unbending, remote. But beneath the calm she sensed a storm far greater than the one trembling in the clouds. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the stillness. He turned, startled by the urgency in her tone. "This is no hour for you to rise," he said evenly. She ignored him. "You mean to fight him?" He did not ask how she knew. "It cannot be avoided." "Whom?" He hesitated only a moment. "Lord Blackthorne." Her breath caught. "Clara's." "Her betrayer," he said quietly. "Her ruin." She took a step forward. "And now mine, I suppose, for you will not return from it." His jaw tightened. "You assume too little of me." "I assume too much of pride," she replied, voice trembling despite herself. "Adrian, a duel, what honor could it restore? The world has already taken everything from her. Will you let it take you too?" He met her gaze, his own unreadable. "This is not about honor. It is about truth. He has returned to London, spreading lies of you as he once did of her. He names you his former mistress." She recoiled as if struck. "What?" "I warned you what trust invites." His tone faltered. "I will not have your name dragged through their filth." The words sliced through the space between them, defense disguised as vengeance, devotion hidden beneath wrath. For a moment she could not breathe. "You would kill him for gossip?" she whispered. "For justice," he said. She stepped closer, the scent of rain and leather filling her senses. "And if you die?" "Then I die for something untainted." She searched his face, its marble composure, its buried pain, and found in it the echo of every secret he had tried to bury. "Do not make Clara's ghost your master," she said softly. "She has haunted you long enough." His eyes flared, but something broke beneath them. "You think I want this?" he said hoarsely. "I want peace, Eliza. But peace is not granted to those who live by silence. This must end." "Then let it end differently," she pleaded. "Let me speak for myself. Let me face him." "No," the word landed with finality. "He will meet me at dawn. It is already decided." She caught his sleeve, desperate now. "Adrian." He took her hand, briefly, fiercely, as though anchoring himself against her. "If I do not return, there is a letter in my study. It will explain everything." She felt his pulse against her palm, steady but cold. "Don't make me your widow before I have even been your wife." His expression softened then, unbearably so. "You deserve a man without ghosts." "Then stop creating them," she whispered. He released her hand and turned away. The door shut behind him with the sound of inevitability. Rain began as soon as he left, thin, relentless, unending. Eliza did not weep. She dressed, summoned her carriage, and followed. The roads were treacherous, mud slick beneath the wheels, but she would not be left behind again, not to rumor, not to silence, not to grief. By the time she reached the moor beyond Ashcombe Woods, The duelists were already assembled beneath the pale dawn. The mist lay heavy on the field, veiling everything in gray. She could make out 3 figures: Adrian, rigid and still, his second, Captain Mordaunt, and opposite them a tall, dark-haired man with a smirk too calm for such a morning. Lord Blackthorne. She stepped out before anyone could stop her. "Adrian," she called. Her voice tore through the fog like a bell. Every head turned. "Eliza, no!" Mordaunt tried to intercept her, but she pushed past him. Blackthorne's lips curled into a mocking smile. Ah, the lady herself. I had wondered if she would come to witness her champion's gallantry. She ignored him, striding toward Adrian, her skirts dragging through wet earth. "End this," she said fiercely. "Right now." He stared at her, disbelief cutting through the composure he wore like armor. "You should not be here." "I should be everywhere my name is used," she snapped. "You think this will silence him? No. He will die, and others will speak worse." Blackthorne laughed softly. "The Duchess has courage, how quaint." Eliza turned on him, voice low and trembling. "You destroyed Clara. You think to destroy me too?" He tilted his head. "You did that yourself, madam, when you sought comfort in a man who hides behind grief." Adrian moved, so suddenly she barely saw it. One stride forward, pistol raised, eyes blazing. "You will not speak her name." "Adrian, stop!" Eliza cried, but the moment had already ignited. The second stepped back. The count began. 1. Rain fell harder, drumming against earth and bone. 2. Eliza's heart hammered, her voice locked in her throat. 3. A flash, a report. Smoke coiled through the rain. Blackthorne staggered, then straightened untouched. Across the field, Adrian's pistol dropped from his hand. His arm hung limp, a dark bloom spread through the fabric of his coat. Eliza ran to him, slipping through mud, catching him before he fell. "No, no, Adrian." He winced, breath shallow. "Not fatal." "You fool," she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. "You absolute fool." Blackthorne approached slowly, his smirk replaced by something like disbelief. He missed. Adrian's voice rasped low and sharp. "I did not." For the first time, Blackthorne faltered. Then he followed Adrian's gaze downward to his own chest, where blood was spreading silently through his shirt. His face went pale. He stumbled back, eyes wide, and fell into the mud without a sound. Eliza froze. The mist swallowed him whole. Mordaunt came running, shouting orders, summoning men, but she barely heard. She cradled Adrian's face in her hands, rain mingling with tears she had refused until now. "You could have died." "I warned you," he murmured. "The pattern repeats." "No," she said fiercely. "You broke it. Do you hear me? You broke it." He gave a faint, exhausted smile. "You should have stayed away." "I will never stay away again." The men carried him back to the carriage. The world moved in fragments, the smell of iron and storm, the creak of wheels, the blurred landscape racing past. When they reached the manor, his color had drained to marble. The physician worked quickly, muttering of near misses and shattered flesh. Eliza waited outside the chamber, her gown soaked and her hands still streaked with his blood. Hours bled into dusk. When at last the door opened, the doctor bowed. "He will live," he said, "if he chooses to." She entered the room, silently. He lay pale upon the bed, half-conscious, bandaged, and still. She sat beside him, her fingers brushing his. "You are the most infuriating man I have ever known," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. "And yet you stayed." "I had no choice," she said softly. "You made yourself my home." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes dark with everything unspoken. "Then perhaps," he murmured, "I am finally forgiven." She leaned closer, tears trembling on her lashes. "Not yet, but soon." Outside, the rain softened, thinning into mist. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. Down the corridor, a servant approached with a sealed envelope, damp, the wax still intact. The letter from his study. Eliza broke the seal with shaking hands. The handwriting was his. "If I fall," it read, Know that you were never my penance, but my absolution. Her breath caught. The page trembled. She looked toward the bed, toward the man who had risked damnation for her name, and for the first time, she understood the depth of his silence. Love in him had always been a war, and though the storm had passed, she knew, somewhere beyond the fog of morning, another reckoning still waited. The rain returned as though the heavens had remembered what grief felt like. It came softly at first, pattering against the tall windows of Warrington Manor, then steadied into a relentless rhythm that blurred the world beyond into gray motion. Eliza stood by the glass, her reflection pale and uncertain, watching the storm gather over the fields. 2 days had passed since the duel. 2 days of silence, of anxious half-sleep and unanswered prayers. Adrian had not yet risen from his bed. The wound was healing, but his spirit seemed lost in some distant corridor of memory, unreachable. She had visited him each hour, reading aloud from the book he once said he despised, merely to fill the quiet. Yet today, the air felt different. The house hummed with something unspoken, a shift, perhaps, or an ending. When she entered his chamber, he was sitting upright for the first time, his gaze turned toward the window. The light fell softly upon his face, tracing the edges that life had carved so deeply there. He looked almost young again, though his eyes held the weight of years. "You should not be out of bed," she said, her voice gentle, but he only smiled faintly. "Should I not?" he murmured. "I have spent a lifetime doing as I should. I find rebellion suits me in my convalescence." She approached, seating herself beside him. "You nearly died. Does that not mean anything to you?" He turned toward her then, eyes dark, reflective. "It means I have something left to lose," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain against the glass. She wanted to tell him that the world outside was already whispering, that Blackthorn's death had been declared self-defense, that his reputation was no longer shadowed but burnished by rumor into reluctant admiration. Yet none of it mattered. What mattered was the hollow ache in his eyes, the guilt that refused to die. "I have read your letter," she said softly. "You wrote that I was your absolution. I do not wish to be anyone's redemption." He nodded slowly. "Then what do you wish to be?" "Your future," she whispered. Something in him broke at that. A crack in the armor that had taken years to build. He reached for her hand, and for once there was no tremor in his touch. "Eliza," he said, her name a confession. "If I could undo what has been, if I could silence every cruel tongue—" "You cannot," she interrupted, "nor can I, but we can outlive them." He drew a breath, and in that fragile silence she saw the man beneath the legend. Not the Duke of Warrington, nor the scandal that bore his name, but simply Adrian, tired, flawed, human. "I ask Mordaunt to prepare the carriage," he said at last. Her brow furrowed. "In this storm." "I will not remain in this mausoleum another day," he said, his tone quiet, but unyielding. "London awaits. Our marriage must be witnessed, our vows spoken in the eyes of those who once judged you. Let them see you walk beside me." Her heart stuttered. "You mean to face them all?" "I mean to reclaim what they stole." She wanted to protest, but his resolve was already set, and something in her, some quiet courage, rose to meet it. "Then I will come," she said simply. The journey began at dusk. The rain thickened, veiling the countryside in silver threads. Inside the carriage, the air was dim and close. Candlelight flickered between them, its glow shifting over his face. For a time, neither spoke. The rhythmic clatter of hooves was the only sound, steady, hypnotic, like a pulse shared between them. Eliza watched the water streak down the glass. "You were right that night," she said finally. "I did not understand you. I thought you cruel, proud, unreachable. But pride is only another name for fear, is it not?" He turned toward her, his gaze softening. "And cruelty another for loneliness." She smiled faintly. "Then we have been both." The carriage jolted as it struck a rut in the road, throwing her forward. His hand caught her instinctively, steadying her. She stayed there, in his grasp, heart hammering, the candlelight trembling between them. "Tell me something true," she whispered. He hesitated, then said, I have been waiting for this storm to end since the day I met you." She looked up, startled by the tenderness in his voice. "And now," he said, "I no longer wish it to." The words lingered between them, simple, devastating, entirely sincere. The carriage slowed. The driver shouted something muffled through the rain. Ahead, the road had flooded, a river of mud and reflection. They would have to wait. Adrian exhaled, leaning back. So the world conspires to delay, even this. Eliza laughed softly, shaking her head. "Perhaps it only wishes to see if we will break." He studied her then, truly studied her, as though memorizing her face in the flickering light. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, "I have been many things, soldier, sinner, coward, but never free. Not until you." She felt her throat tighten. "Then promise me, Adrian, no more duels, no more ghosts." He nodded once, gravely. "Only you." Outside, thunder rolled across the fields, a deep and distant drum. The rain eased, lightening into a mist that shimmered in the faint glow of the lanterns. He reached across the narrow space, his fingers brushing her cheek, and for the first time, she did not flinch from the intensity in his eyes. "Then let the world see," she whispered. He kissed her, not with hunger, but with reverence, as if sealing a vow that words could never hold. The carriage rocked gently with the movement, the sound of rain softening to a hush. For a moment, time dissolved, leaving only warmth, breath, and the heartbeat of two people who had bled their pride dry. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arm around her, gaze fixed on the storm beyond. The road ahead was still half lost to fog, but for the first time in years he smiled. "Strange," he murmured. "I thought the rain a punishment. Now it feels like grace." The carriage rolled forward again, wheels cutting through the water, carrying them toward whatever awaited, judgment, forgiveness, or perhaps something gentler still. And as the dawn began to lift the sky from gray to pale gold, Eliza closed her eyes, knowing that the world could whisper what it pleased. The Duke's reputation had terrified her once. But his silence, his heart, had been waiting all along.